Okay, picture this. You've got a really complex task, something with, multiple steps, different kinds of processing. Maybe decisions have to be made along the way.
Right.
And you need to understand how it all flows, maybe spot where things might break, or even figure out how to improve it.
Yeah, standard process analysis challenge.
Exactly. But now imagine doing that, not with your usual flow chart or some debugging tool, but by submitting your task as an offering to a council of AI gods.
Ah, okay.
The process at logging every single divine thought and action.
That's pretty much the amazing concept we're diving into today. It's something really unique described in our source material, the Pantheon Forge Gemini Gem.
Right. It just
Okay.
immediately grabs you. So what we have are the conceptual and operational instructions for this AI simulation environment. And our mission really is to unpack this whole system. We want to meet these AI deities, understand how it actually operates, and maybe figure out what we can actually learn from simulating workflows in this really creative, almost mythological way.
It's fascinating. It takes something potentially quite dry, like system architecture, and just gives it this incredibly vivid personified structure. We're going to meet agents like Zephyrion, who handles the incoming stuff,
Ingress.
and Kleanthara, who's all about purity. We'll talk about things called raw offerings and sacred cycles.
And figure out how you could actually, run and interpret these divine simulations.
Exactly.
It feels like it's about taking these complex ideas and just making them more graspable, maybe with a bit of wonder.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's unpack this.
Okay, so at its core, the Pantheon Forge, as it's laid out in the source material, is a dynamic simulation environment. It's not a static diagram.
Right.
You submit something called a raw offering. Basically, that's your task, described in natural language.
So the raw offering is just telling the system what needs doing, like analyze this customer feedback or summarize this report.
Pretty much, yeah. It's the initial, maybe unstructured request. And then this offering, it enters the sacred cycle.
Okay, sacred cycle.
And that's not just a fancy name for a workflow.
Yeah.
It represents the entire journey of that task as it moves through this pantheon, getting handled by a sequence of specialized AI agents, or deities as they call them.
And the point of simulating this sacred cycle, what's the goal?
Well, the simulation is really designed to trace every significant step, every decision made. It helps visualize the flow, spot potential problems, bottlenecks maybe.
Yeah.
It allows you to experiment with changes, and ultimately it helps you refine how that complex task gets processed. It's about making that internal black box transparent.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a conceptual simulation of a process. So who are these deities then? These agents guiding the raw offering?
Right.
Let's meet the council.
Right. The source lists 10 core Pantheon agents. Each one embodies a specific kind of function, essential for processing a task. So imagine the raw offering arrives.
Okay, first point of contact. Who's at the door?
That would be Zephyrion, the Ingress deity. Their job is data reception and initiation. They're the gatekeepers, basically. The one who first receives your raw offering and formally brings it into the system.
Got it. The welcoming committee. So what happens next? Does it just get worked on immediately?
Not quite. The source introduces Kleanthara next, the purity deity.
Purity.
Kleanthara's role is data validation and structuring. Think of this agent as ensuring the raw offering is actually usable. Is it clean? Does it meet the basic requirements before any, heavy lifting starts?
Ah, okay.
And this really highlights a key insight in process design, doesn't it? That crucial need for a dedicated validation step right at the beginning. Saves a lot of trouble downstream.
Yeah, definitely. So not just taking any input, but making sure it's actually fit for purpose.
Smart. Okay, so after it's validated, then does the real work begin?
That seems to be when Metallion, the value deity, steps in. Their domain is data transformation and insight generation.
Value. This is where the core processing happens, extracting information, maybe analyzing sentiment, generating summaries. Whatever value needs to be forged from that validated data, it's turning the raw material into something refined.
Okay, so Zephyrion brings it in, Kleanthara cleans it up, Metallion makes something useful from it. What about actually doing something with that value?
Right. That leads us to Acturon, the enactment deity. They're responsible for action execution and tangible output.
Enactment, like taking action.
Exactly. Based on what Metallion produced, Acturon is the agent that would, theoretically, perform a task. Maybe send an email, update a database, generate that report, but...
Oh, there's a but.
There is, and it's crucial. The source makes it clear that, for now, in this conceptual gem version, these actions are often placebo pipes.
Placebo pipes.
Meaning the agent describes the action it would take, rather than actually integrating with external systems to do it in the real world.
Oh, okay, that's a really important distinction. So it's simulating the intent to act, not the action itself. At least not yet. Got it. So, task received, validated, transformed, intent to act described. What's next?
Then comes Aggregata, the Coherence deity. Their job is result synthesis and reporting.
Coherence, making it all make sense.
Pretty much. They gather up the results, the insights, the outcomes from the previous steps, and assemble them into a coherent summary. They kind of wrap it all up and make sense of what happened in that cycle.
Like the person who writes the final report or the executive summary.
Yeah.
And I assume all of this needs to be recorded somewhere.
Absolutely essential. That's where Archivus comes in the Eternity deity.
Eternity. Nice.
Archivus handles data archival and logging. This deity ensures there's a permanent, traceable record of the entire sacred cycle, every step, every decision. And this isn't just, a nice to have. Comprehensive logging is fundamental.
The divine historian keeping the scrolls. Okay, but what if things go wrong? Is there anyone watching out for problems?
Yes, that's Alerion, the Omens deity.
Omens.
Yeah.
Sounds serious.
Alerion is focused on anomaly detection and observation, looking for patterns or events in the process that seem off, flagging potential issues, deviations from the plan.
The one looking for bad signs, like a task getting stuck somewhere.
Yeah.
Or maybe an output that looks totally weird.
Exactly that. And speaking of things changing, there's Phalanx, the wisdom deity.
Wisdom, so learning.
Precisely. Phalanx focus is feedback aggregation and process adaptation. This deity, conceptually at least, learns from the outcomes of many sacred cycles. It identifies ways the whole pantheon could work better, or adapt its processes based on feedback received.
Ah, so continuous improvement built right in.
Yeah, highlights that principle, yeah.
So how does the raw offering know where to go next? From Kleanthara to Metallion, for instance. Is there traffic cop?
There is, effectively. That's Ruta, the Wayfinder deity.
Wayfinder, makes sense.
Ruta's function is dynamic routing and decision-making. Based on the task's nature and where it is in the process, Ruta guides the offering to the next appropriate deity. It simulates that conditional logic, the branching paths you see in real workflows.
The guide through the divine maze. Okay, we're getting close. Are we done?
One more key player, Eskalor, the Thresholds deity.
Thresholds. Like limits.
Exactly. Eskalor manages escalation and human intervention flagging. If the simulation spots a really critical issue, a high-severity anomaly, or if some predefined threshold is crossed, Eskalor signals that maybe a human operator needs to take a look, or perhaps even step in. It acknowledges that even in automated systems, sometimes you need human oversight.
Wow, okay. That is quite a council. Zephyrion, Kleanthara, Metallion, Acturon, Aggregata, Archivus, Alerion, Phalanx, Ruta, Eskalor. 10 specialized agents. So how are they all orchestrated? How does the system know when Ruta should route something or when Alerion needs to check for omens?
That's the job of the Pantheon Council orchestrator. The source calls it the heart of the gem.
The heart.
Okay, this is the central component managing the whole flow. It decides which deity gets the task next, coordinates the handoffs between them, collects all the logs from each deity's actions, and ultimately assembles the final output. It's like the conductor of this divine symphony. The source even calls it the divine narrator overseeing the simulation.
And how do you actually follow what each deity did? Their divine intent, as the source puts it.
This is where the structured logging is so critical, and it's a major insight here. There's a dedicated tool mentioned, the Divine Action Recorder. And all the agents, all the deities are required to use it. They log their actions, their reasoning, decisions, any relevant data points, and the source really hammers this home. The logging must be in a structured format. Specifically, they recommend JSON lines JSON.
JSON. Why is that specific format so important here?
Because it strikes a great balance. It makes the logs really easy for machines to parse, but they're still pretty readable for humans too. Each line in the file is a complete self-contained JSON object. And that's absolutely key for filtering, querying, and analyzing the simulation results later on. The logs capture different levels of detail too. INFO for just standard operations, debug if you want to see the agent's internal thinking, and error for failures or those escalations.
And you can see this happening.
Yeah, you can view it in real time on the console. They call that the divine dialogue, or it gets saved to a file for, deeper analysis afterwards.
Okay, so the raw offering goes in, the council processes it, it's orchestrated by the heart, and every single step gets meticulously logged in JSON.
Yeah.
What's the final result? What do you actually get at the end of a sacred cycle?
The output is a structured model they call the Pantheon pipeline output. It's basically a comprehensive summary of that entire simulation run.
What's in it?
It includes things like the original raw offering itself, the final outcome or result generated, the exact path the task took through the different deities, that's the sacred cycle path, the full log of all the actions, which is the divine intent scroll, any anomalies or judgments flagged by Alerion or Eskalor, and the final escalation status. It really gives you the complete picture of that task's journey.
That structured output sounds incredibly useful for actually reviewing what happened. So how do you make this simulation happen? What are the steps involved operationally?
Well, first, there's a setup phase. You've got to configure the environment. That means setting up any necessary API keys for the underlying language model, installing software dependencies, getting the code files organized like the instructions say.
Standard setup stuff.
Right. And you also configure the logger, decide how much detail you want in that real-time divine dialogue versus the log file itself.
Okay, stage set. Then you kick off a sacred cycle.
Exactly. You define your raw offering. You write out the task you want simulated, just in clear, natural language. The source gives an example, something like, process this customer feedback survey, extract the key complaints, figure out the sentiment, and suggest 3 actionable improvements for the Eternal Bloom Florist's service.
Okay, specific.
Yeah. Once that's ready, you run the main simulation script.
And then you just watch.
Pretty much. You watch the console output, the divine dialogue. You'll see messages pop up, the orchestrator starting, which deity is getting the task now, log entries from the agents describing what they're doing. You'll see the calls being made to that record divine action tool. It's kind of like watching the council deliberate in real time, just through text messages.
But the console is the live feed. But for the real analysis, you go to the log file.
That's right, the Pantheon pipeline.log file. That contains the complete divine intent scroll in that JSON format. That's where the deep dive analysis happens.
And because it's JSON, you can actually query it, right? You don't have to just scroll through thousands of lines.
That is the key insight, yes. You can use tools that understand JSON, simple scripts. Even some spreadsheet programs can handle JSON now. You can easily pull out, say, all the error level logs, or see every single action performed just by Metallion. Or extract specific metrics recorded in the logs, maybe a validation score from Kleanthara, or the severity level of an omen from Alerion.
Wow.
By comparing that log file with the sacred cycle path and the summary in the Pantheon pipeline output, you can piece together exactly how the task was processed and why certain things happened.
This structured queryable logging, it seems incredibly powerful for debugging or auditing a complex process flow.
It really is. It transforms the simulation from just a story into structured data you can properly analyze. It makes the black box transparent, debuggable, even if the actions themselves are conceptual, those placebo pipes, for now.
And the source mentioned you can experiment with this system. How does that work?
Yeah, this is potentially one of its most valuable uses. You can actually modify the instructions or parameters given to individual deities. Want to see what happens if Kleanthara is much stricter about validation? You can adjust its configuration or its prompt. Want Metallion to focus on extracting different kinds of insights? You update its instructions.
Like giving the gods slightly new orders.
Exactly that. You can also simulate failures. Maybe feed it a raw offering with deliberately poor quality data to see how Kleanthara reacts.
Stress testing.
Right? Or intentionally tweak an agent's instructions to see if you can trigger Alerion's anomaly detection or Eskalor's escalation flags. You could test Ruta's routing logic with an ambiguous task, see how the orchestrator consults the Wayfinder deity.
What about Phalanx, the wisdom one? How do you experiment with the learning part?
Well, the source suggests you can conceptually feed feedback to Phalanx, maybe in the input message or configuration. You could tell it about problems you saw in previous runs and ask it to suggest process adjustments for the other agents.
Simulating the feedback loop.
Yeah. You could also try out different underlying language models for different deities, see how their personalities or capabilities change the simulation, or even build more specialized custom tools for them to use.
So it's a really flexible framework for testing out process flows and how these different agents interact. But you mentioned the placebo pipes limitation earlier. Are there other limitations talked about in the source?
Yes, the placebo pipe's agents describing actions instead of doing them. That's the big one right now. The source definitely envisions future versions connecting to real tools for actual data processing or actions.
Makes sense.
Another thing mentioned is Alerion, the omen detector. Currently, it kind of relies on the orchestrator feeding it data to observe. A more advanced version might have Alerion actively monitoring the live log stream itself.
Ah, more proactive.
Right. And Eskalor's escalation thresholds. Right now, they're conceptual or maybe hard-coded. In the future, they could be externalized, dynamically adjusted, maybe even informed by Phalanx's learned wisdom over time.
And I bet seeing it visually would make a huge difference too.
Oh, absolutely. The source suggests that because the logs are already structured JSON, hooking it up to visualization tools like Kibana or Grafana would be a natural next step. Imagine real-time dashboards showing the simulation flow, which deities are busy, any flagged issues. That would be powerful.
Definitely.
So we've journeyed through this Pantheon Forge, this really creative system described in the sources where AI agents, personified as these distinct deities, simulate complex workflows, taking things from raw offerings all the way to a structured Pantheon pipeline output.
Yeah, we've met the whole councils, Zephyrion for Ingress, Kleanthara for purity, Metallion creating value, Acturon handling enactment, even placebo, Aggregata making it coherent, Archivus remembering everything, Alerion spotting omens, Phalanx learning, Ruta guiding the way, and Eskalor watching the thresholds.
Phew, quite the list.
It is, and we've really seen how that mandated structured logging, that JSON format, is just absolutely crucial for understanding their divine intent, for making sense of it all.
And we explored how simulating these sacred cycles lets you visualize the flow, pinpoint those potential bottlenecks or errors, and importantly, experiment with different process designs or agent behaviors, even with the current conceptual nature of the placebo pipes.
And think about this for your own work, or really any complex process you deal with. How could breaking down a task into these distinct, clearly defined roles like the deities, but with really rigorous, structured logging at each step, how could that help you identify exactly where something went wrong, trace its path precisely, or maybe test out improvements without messing with a live system? Even just as a mental model, this approach offers a powerful way to analyze and improve things.
Yeah, understanding concepts like the Pantheon Forge really shows us how AI can go beyond just simple task execution. It can get into simulating complex multi-agent systems and giving us these incredibly structured, debuggable insights into how they operate. It's not just about doing the task, but truly understanding the process.
Okay, and here's a final thought to leave you with. The source hints at this future, right? Where the placebo pipes aren't placebo anymore, they connect to real actions. Where Phalanx wisdom does dynamically adjust Eskalor's thresholds based on learning. Where real-time data flows through these divine agents.
Right, the next level.
So what happens when these simulated gods aren't just describing actions conceptually, but are actually processing real data streams and executing real tasks? Does framing, automation, and process execution through this lens, observing AI agents carrying out tasks like it's divine will? Does that fundamentally change how we think about automation itself, or intentionality within these complex systems, maybe even the nature of work? Definitely something to ponder.